In the past week, The Witcher 3 Next Gen got some very positive new updates. Earlier today, it explicitly got an update in the form of a new hotfix, but CDPR overall has made some more announcements or highlighted certain issues with the game that get me far more excited for its future. But in a very fascinating twist of fate, CDPR has also explicitly mentioned how they will be downgrading one texture in The Witcher 3 Next Gen, and you may have feelings about that. But of course, earlier today, The Witcher 3 Next Gen got a new update. This was a PC exclusive update, and it was a hotfix intended to address the performance issues that appeared after patch 4.01. Patch 4.01, which I'm just now realizing I called patch 4.1 for the entirety of my last video, but this patch dropped for the game about 2 weeks ago, and the most notable changes were the addition of a new ray tracing performance mode on PC, as well as some visual improvements and optimization for ray tracing on console. So if you did have ray tracing on, it might look slightly worse, but actually give you a couple of extra FPS. Although unfortunately, that update for the consoles actually did come with a pretty big downside. It's been highlighted by numerous people now, but probably best covered by Digital Foundry. When playing on the performance mode on consoles, there was actually a pretty huge FPS hit from that previous update. We're talking about 8 FPS lower in some instances, which is massive when you're only targeting 60 FPS. So you would assume that that huge performance drop on consoles is what this hotfix is all about. Actually, no, this hotfix is only for PC players. And honestly, when it comes to The Witcher 3 Next Gen, saying the hotfix was intended to address performance issues doesn't really narrow it down, because there are quite a few performance issues on PC right now. More specific patch notes in the future would definitely be helpful, CDPR. Either way, this patch was incredibly small, at just 5 megabytes on GOG, but it did have some performance improvements, at least on my build. I tested this out on the quality mode on PC with a 4090 as well as DLSS 2.0 on, and on quality mode I did notice a couple of extra frames. Sometimes it was literally just 2 extra FPS, but at other times I actually did have 4 or 5 extra FPS following this very small update, which although not a game changer is definitely pretty handy and it's definitely pretty nice. And testing the same thing on quality mode but now with DLSS 3.0 aka frame generation on, I noticed the same difference. A couple of extra FPS were felt from this update, but again not really a huge difference, nothing game changing. Looking at the new performance mode on PC, I got far odder results, as I am consistently getting slightly less FPS with performance mode on this new hotfix version compared to the 4.01 build that we got 2 weeks ago. So put simply, I updated my game and I'm now getting slightly less FPS. And the deeper I went into this, the more bizarre it got. If I look back on that original video I made on the patch 4.01 that we got 2 weeks ago, and compare that footage to the new hotfix update we got today, I actually have a huge FPS bump. I'm seeing about 10 FPS more and even sometimes getting 15 FPS more in some areas. That seems suspiciously good to me, like why am I getting so many additional FPS from a relatively small hotfix? So rather than just relying on that gameplay I recorded 2 weeks ago, I re-recorded that gameplay today. And in that re-recorded gameplay, I actually had higher FPS than the same exact gameplay I recorded 2 weeks ago. This is the exact same build of the game on the same computer. There's no hotfix applied on either of these, but somehow I'm getting notably more FPS. And in between these two, the NVIDIA drivers did update, so this right-hand screen is using the updated drivers. That could be this huge FPS bonus. But again, where things get stranger is if I compare this updated 4.01 benchmark with the other benchmark I recorded today with the hotfix. On performance mode, I get slightly less FPS with this latest hotfix. It's not a huge difference, it's not a deal breaker, but a couple of FPS less when I don't have a ton of FPS to begin with is definitely not ideal. And even when I compare performance mode to quality mode with this latest hotfix, I continue to notice next to no FPS difference. And even at points it looked like the quality mode was getting slightly more FPS. So overall, with this latest hotfix, I definitely noticed some FPS gain on quality mode, but FPS drops on performance mode, which is just bizarre. It seems like the recent driver update may have helped FPS for me across the board, although that could be specific to my 4090. Obviously, if you're using a different GPU, you can have a very different result. And it seems like in general, performance mode is going to mostly benefit some of the lower end systems out there. And in general, this hotfix didn't really address any of the major PC performance issues. There's still stuttering issues, you still have general low FPS on DirectX 12, and CPU optimizations are still very much so needed here. I think one of the explanations for some of my performance oddities is I have plenty of GPU power, but I'm being limited by my 5900X CPU. But even with these results, you probably noticed I titled this video as a good or positive update coming to The Witcher 3 Next Gen. So where's the positive part? Well, CDPR updated their currently investigated issues post to include almost all of the big issues with The Witcher 3 Next Gen. They mentioned things like working to improve how the game handles CPU core utilization, trying to improve performance performance on the DirectX 12 version of the game. They hope they will see improvements in the coming patches. The next-gen console performance issues, like the ones we mentioned earlier in this video, are on their radar and hopefully getting fixed, as well as some of the issues with the battle preparations quests getting stuck. And that's not even everything, but those are the big ones. There's quite a few other things on this known issues post as well. And CDPR just being aware of these issues isn't necessarily a great thing, but why I view this as a really positive and good update is it does mark a pretty considerable change of tune from CDPR. See, in the past, we also had a known issues post, and this had far less things on it. It featured things like lower PC performance, but it only mentioned lower PC performance if you had an Intel GPU, which, like, yeah, in fairness, I mean, isn't that kind of expected? You bought an Intel GPU. But the AMD and NVIDIA GPU owners were like, well, what about my performance? And even further, it didn't even really consider worst performance on DirectX 12 a bug, but rather just a byproduct of some of the graphical improvements on that mode. So put simply, the old known issues post was definitely not reflecting what many players were complaining about and their experiences with bugs with the game. But now this new updated version that they just published a couple of days ago directly reflects many of the major issues with the game. It's pretty much spot on. These are the big problems many people, including myself, are having with The Witcher 3 Next Gen. So the fact that this post is now showing that CDPR is aware of them makes me excited for the future, because they're probably going to start getting addressed and we may start noticing even bigger improvements. But there's one issue that many fans have started to take a stand on that CDPR is aware of, and that is that they accidentally added in some HD coochies to The Witcher 3 Next Gen. This is an absolutely hilarious situation, but as a part of The Witcher 3's Next Gen update, CDPR included a variety of community-made mods in the game. Now, these authors of those mods were properly compensated and credited. It's not like they just stole this content, but as a part of a bunch of the mods being added to the game, some of these were texture upgrades for the game. Well, one such texture got a big improvement, and that is the private area of the three crones in human form. While their old version had a Barbie-like level of detail in this area, the updated textures had a surprising degree of complexity and even some personal grooming touches. For obvious reasons, due to YouTube demonetization, I can't really show you this, but basically, once you got to this cutscene with these three characters where you saw them completely nude, all of a sudden one part of their body was far more HD than it was in the previous version. But reportedly this was an error. As CDPR told Kotaku, the next-gen version of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt featured several community-sourced mods not created by CD Projekt Red. This on top of numerous enhancements created and implemented by the studio internally. Merging everything together was a complex process, and the textures in question are an unintended result present in the release version. This is something we are working to address. So yes, CDPR has explicitly confirmed that in a future update for The Witcher 3 Next Gen, they are going to be downgrading one texture. So obviously this isn't really a huge deal. At any point you could just download the texture again for yourself and re-upgrade it, but it's kind of hilarious that CDPR accidentally, apparently, included some very HD textures for a very intimate area on some specific characters. That's the recent update on The Witcher 3 Next Gen. As we do get further and future updates on this game, I will definitely keep you up to date on those as well. But otherwise, check out this recent update on Cyberpunk. It also was pretty confusing.